I want to tell you today about a battle. It's a battle that begins on a mountain. It's a battle that only one person could win. It's the most important historical battle ever. It's the battle to save not only physical lives, but complete lives, body and soul. It's the battle to bring hope, the only hope that's worth having. So the mountain on which this battle happens is probably not even worth calling a mountain. It's probably like a hill. It's called the Mount of Olives, and it's just outside Jerusalem. It involves 4 men and 1 cup. 4 men and 1 cup. The cup is an Old Testament image. An Old Testament image of God's wrath. God's wrath is his righteous and just anger against sin. All sin is dreadful. And we know, even in our own justice system, that punishment is given not because of what is done, but because of who it's against. For example, if I crush an ant, there will be no punishment. If I extinguish the life of that ant, of that living being, there is no punishment for me extinguishing the life of a living being. But if I punch a baby, I'm going to go to prison. At least I hope I would. And so we see that the crime, that the punishment for the crime is not just about what is done, but about who it's against. And sin, folks, is against God. And all sin against God deserves death, deserves the wrath of God, deserves the righteous justice of God. And when God's wrath is displayed, his justice is also displayed. So the cup is symbolic of God's wrath. And this cup contains wrath, the wrath of God against all sin. The wrath of God against all sin. Against the sins of people in the past, against sins of the people in the future. Against the sins of me and the sins of you. On the other side we have 4 men. 4 men are Peter, James, John, and Jesus. I'm going to read to you what happens on this mountain, this Mount of Olives. And this is from Matthew chapter 26, verses 36 to 46. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. He said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to feel sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Could you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray, so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. When he came back, he again found them sleeping, because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." Here we have Jesus with his 3 best disciples. Surely they could have helped Jesus. Surely it needed more than just one person. Surely all 4 of them could have contributed, but we see that they don't. These 3 men with Jesus, they fall asleep. They fall asleep. They just leave Jesus. They cannot do what Jesus can do. They cannot face the cup that God is about to pour out on Jesus. Only one can face that cup. And so this is the battle. The battle that begins here and goes on to tomorrow, Good Friday. It's the battle not to win, but to face the cup. Jesus faced all difficulties and stresses and strains. He faced them with calmness and with ease. He always knew exactly what to say to the Pharisees who opposed him. He always knew how to treat the sick and the ill and the people possessed with demons and the blind and the deaf and the lame. He always knew how to face them, and he always faced them with calmness and with ease. But now, faced with the cup of God's wrath against the sin of the entire world, he is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. This is what it means to face punishment for sin. He says to his disciples, "Could you have not kept watch with me?" And then he says, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Jesus has a body of flesh. Jesus chose to come and identify himself with us, to take on a body of flesh. Jesus is God. Jesus is human. And it's not like they just sit side by side. They are all contained in one. This is Jesus. He is God, and he is fully man, and they are all contained in one person who is Jesus. And this is mind-blowing, and we cannot understand it. And we also cannot separate them out. This is Jesus. And Jesus' spirit is willing, but his flesh is weak. Jesus gets hungry. He gets thirsty. He gets tired. He gets weak. Weak is not a sin. He is completely sinless. But at this moment in time, he is facing the biggest challenge of his entire life, the biggest challenge anyone has ever faced. He is struggling because the cup of God's wrath is so dreadful. Jesus knows he has to face it. He has to face it to save humanity, to save me, and to save you. And notice that 3 times he prays. And 3 times he is willing. And 3 times he wins the war. He says at the end, "Rise, let us go." This battle on the Mount of Olives to face the cup of God's wrath has been won by Jesus and no one else. He is willing to face the cup of God's wrath for humanity, for me, and for you. The question is today, have you thanked Jesus for doing that?